Hey, what's going on? Eric Bach here with the Eric Bach Show. Today we sit down with my friend Mike Over. Mike is a world-class coach, and today we're going to dig into a number of things, specifically with inflammation and joint health, especially for former athletes. You see, stress levels are higher than ever, and if we're not dialed in terms of our stress management, in terms of our gut health, then that can actually sabotage the hard work that we are putting in directly in the gym. Beyond both of us looking like some guy that could star in White Men Can't Jump, we dig into all of these details in terms of your training, nutrition, and get some really nitty-gritty tactics that you can take and apply directly to your training and to your life. Now, if you're getting value from the show, please do me one quick favor. Drop us a like or a 5-star review on whatever platform you prefer. That is how we know that we are hitting home with our content and providing you with the value that we need. And of course, that allows us to keep us free of advertisements, which we do not want to deter you from enjoying these shows. Because I don't know about you, but when I'm on a podcast, I'm hitting next, just to get past that shit. All right. What was it like running a gym when the pandemic hit and all the closures hit? Like, how did you deal with that?
That was a tough one, especially when everybody thinks that you should have done something, but then it's like, well, this is a pandemic. We weren't supposed to expect a lot of this to happen. So it was definitely a new nuance that I had to deal with, because members ultimately then had to learn, like, automatically from, why do they go to a gym, right? They want the in-person stuff. So then it became, you have to kind of sacrifice and deal with the online training. And it was, not to mention, very difficult because all of my staff was gone, and I had to do about 6 to 8 live videos a day in my gym just to keep membership up. And then they had to understand why we were doing it. So it became hard. And, some of the people were like, well, I don't want this. And government didn't know how to kind of do this. But at the end of the day, landlords still wanted their money for rent. So we're trying to keep memberships up, and, gyms across the country were struggling at this.
Yeah, no doubt. Talk about a trying time. For so many business owners, so many people across the board, and especially with something as vital, especially during that time, is health and fitness. To see any type of business that really supports something that's actually going to help prevent some of the negative outcomes that could potentially happen with something like COVID and all that was going on, then see those closures, and then having to deal with that stress individually as a father, as a business owner. Man, I think that's something we can all relate to, though, like how to navigate those stressful times. And so, so you pivoted your business, you made a lot of shifts in terms of the online stuff. Now, like, with people going through those stressful times, particularly during COVID, like, what have you learned as a coach that has really helped you improve the lives of primarily the men? I know you work with some women as well, but primarily men, the people that you work with. Like, stress management, how important is that to the overall picture?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question, man. And the biggest thing that I always tell people about the experience is what allowed me to be good at what I do online was because of the 12 years seeing it in person and seeing things, like, literally the problems come right to my face. And it was a lot of this whole thing where people would come in for 30 days, right? They would drop a lot of weight, but then I'd see them 2 months later at Giant and they were running from me because they gained it all back. And it became this cycle of this hamster wheel where I kept trying to have to get people to come into the gym and new members because they just kept leaving. And the crazy stat that you want to know is if someone didn't come to the gym for 9 days, they were 92% likely to never return. So it's a broken model that when I started to pivot, I was like, okay, well, as a coach, I've now learned, because a lot of the problems of why people can't sustain healthy weight loss was simply because they didn't understand the demands that their body required to keep longevity with health. So it was the stress. We're not 20, 30 anymore. And as we age, the recovery becomes more important. And so, in a gym, what I was doing was a lot of HIIT boot camps, CrossFit type workouts. Now, unless I was training teams or athletes, but these people love that stuff, but they didn't realize that they can't continue to do this stuff all the time. So when I went online and started transitioning to being more of a one-on-one coach that way, like you do, it became more of a good need for me to help give people that assurance and need and that mindset around, hey, the stress needs to be controlled for you to get where you want to go first. And so I incorporate those things into my programming and coaching to help, like you do, get people that reality check of, hey, if your body needs to progress or if you want to lose weight, you can't do that if you're inflamed or stressed all the time.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think a lot of times, people get roped into particularly like different styles of training and diet protocols that don't necessarily suit the other areas of their life. And I think, like, one of the most important things that I talk about, and we've talked about this before, is you need this balance. You need synergy. You need a balance between the type of training that you do, the way that you eat, and the rest of your lifestyle. And I think what a lot of people do is they find one type of workout, they find one diet style that might be trendy right now, and then they throw them together without factoring in the overall stress load
Yeah.
that it happens to have. And I'm talking like 98% of people. And frankly, a lot of people get pretty good results with this if they stay consistent with either one of those things. But really what prevents people from getting to the top and really accomplishing their goals a lot of times is this misalignment. And so you were touching on like some of the high intensity stuff that, definitely like for a gym model, it's really crucial. That's really what keeps people engaged, keeps them focused on. But it sounds like a lot of times that's not always the best thing individually, at least in a one-on-one setting where you're trying to optimize for one person. Can you tell me, like, obviously there are benefits, like let's talk about a couple of the benefits of like some of the high intensity training, some of the even like exercise class model versus maybe a more focused approach on like some strategic strength training, stress reduction in these areas.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know like you train the same way, so you'll agree with me on all this stuff. But the basics of some of the high intense stuff is really great because actually studies have shown that testosterone and even growth hormone can peak at about that 20-30 minutes mark whenever you're doing high intense work. So people get that high, kind of like that runner's high. You get that whenever you get into hit. It just always comes with that negative feedback loop if you're not healthy. And that's just what makes the problem within America, because we see, I mean, let's be real, over 2/3 of our country has undiagnosed autoimmune issues, and 70% of doctor visits are those that have to deal with stress. So we're not healthy. And so when you continue down that rabbit hole of keeping the hit going, it does have benefits within short-term parts, which is why cycling it in is always a good thing. But making that a prime model for your training can always have detrimental effects down the road. But, as far as what we go with when in strategic approaches, that's always going to be something that I want to say people can always be consistent with strategic approach, but having to coax somebody to, hey, I have to go literally beat my body up for 30 minutes. Because if you're like me, I mean, when you do a hit workout, you're not going to be coasting. I mean, you go at it. I mean, you go so hard that you really have to be mentally like, okay, I need to know that I'm going to be kind of in some excruciating
No
kind of
doubt.
mental fatigue here and physical. So to have to tell yourself to do that 7 days a week can be a little bit hard. So when you start incorporating those other areas that you can start, maybe it's restorative yoga, maybe you're adding in some more, steady state cardio to your work, or some more just basic weightlifting, you can be more well balanced. And so that's why I don't want to say that it's never a time and place, just like a diet, right? Diets have their time and places. They have their parts in someone's human body, but you can't just keep that focus. And I think so many people get caught up on it because it's that immediate result that they see. So they think that's the only thing they got to keep doing.
Yeah, I think it's the immediate feedback of like, hey, I burnt this many calories. Or you go to a thing like Orange Theory, like, hey, look, I was in a high intensity zone for this
Oh,
amount
I
of
mean,
time, and this is what my burn was.
we used the MyZone belts, and it was, I mean, people literally would be midnight at night and we'd have competitions, and they'd be running up and down their stairs in their house to get maps from just the continuations of their workouts from that day. And I mean, it builds a great competitive atmosphere and a good thing in the mindset of people, but it creates that negative relationship, I feel, with fitness over time, because then they start feeling like their body has to be put through that sort of pain to get that result. Whenever you and I both know that consistent effort over time, doing things that are not basically trashing your body every day, will lead to a better outcome.
No doubt. No doubt. I'm sure that's quite a learning experience as well, like as a coach, because you see, some things going on. And sometimes there's a perspective of like, do what people do consistently, even if it's suboptimal, versus like chasing what's optimal if people won't stick with it consistently, and that's kind of that battle, that kind of push and pull between both what like, hey, what would be an optimal kind of like prescription, so to speak, versus what are people most likely to stick with? Because that consistency is the most important thing. I think a lot of times people get so bogged down thinking about training as like, how many calories did I burn?
Yeah.
There's this reductionist kind of philosophy, which again, like in one way, it's a simple way to think about it. Like same thing with nutrition. Like, yes, calories in, calories out. Is that the king? It is, but there's so much context that has to be applied to it
Yeah.
that I think people get into the idea of just chasing calorie expenditure. And what a lot of people don't consider is like the higher the intensity you're training and the longer that you're training, the more stressful it is on your body. And so if you're getting 5 or 6 hours of sleep a night on a good night, if you have stress from relationships, from work, from getting cut off in traffic, from watching too much of the news, whatever it is that drives you up a wall, and then you follow it up with, crazy high intensity workouts, and then you have flavor of the month right now, still seems like forever, low carb, high fat diets, like you have this imbalance, right? It's like carbohydrates are nature's more or less stress reduction, right? It can definitely help reduce cortisol, your body's primary stress hormone, and it's the optimal fuel for those high intensity workouts. And so I think the big takeaway like for this portion is It's not that any one of these types of workouts are bad. It's just if there's a misalignment between these other areas of your life, then you're going to run into issues. And being that stress is such a major, major thing, it has been for a long time, but really since the pandemic, like I've seen a massive spike in like the amount of stress reduction stuff that I have to do with clients, stuff that I have to do personally, especially becoming, a father and shifting businesses and all that stuff. Like it's been wild. Another thing that a lot of people struggle with is then like you take these high intensity approaches, but then your body starts to fight back. And I think as a former athlete, like that's something I can relate to. A lot of the things that you do to optimize performance are not going to be ideal for longevity or joint health. And I think now we're seeing that more and more because more people are frankly jumping, sprinting, hitting the barbells, doing these things, even if they're not athletes, just with the growth of CrossFit and these different methods. So let's talk about joint health. Like how can guys specifically who are in their 30s, in their mid 30s, who've been maybe athletes, have been active, who are starting to deal with joint pain, what are some recommendations that you would have? Like, let's start with a general approach and then we can get more specific.
Yeah, and that's a great question too, because the biggest thing that I wanted to tell people is that being an athlete for years and a college athlete and everything, my body went through the ringer from broken bones to I was actually hit by a car when I was a triathlete 11 years ago and was really laid up for a long time. And the big thing that I even developed from stress of all of this was continued Crohn's disease of my stomach and a lot of different things that happened within my body as well as the joint pain. So I then took a big approach as to figuring out why it happened, what to do about it, and how to then correct it. And the biggest thing that you will start seeing with guys, and especially you see with clients that you work with, is that, look, I don't even really care about having a six pack. I just want to not hurt when I wake up in the morning and be able to play with my kids. And your mindset shifts from, because in the 20s, it's how much weight can you lift, to your 30s of what can I do to stop hurting all the time and just look good naked, and that's the whole theory of what a lot of guys want. And so for joint health, there becomes that negative feedback loop, because so many people want to chase the workouts. They want to chase that, hey, I got to train hard. But training hard is great. But if you're not recovering harder, then your body's going to have that negative loop back. So when it comes to joint health, it's important because guys don't really focus on the small things like, you and I both have to do like every day. Whether we incorporate mobility into our workout, you still have to do it. Now, do you need 20 minutes of it in your workout? No. But between sets, adding some certain things in or working through it throughout the day. I mean, sometimes I'm heading over there and I'm just putting my hips up on the counter and working into a pigeon stretch. But it's the small things that can go a long way to keeping yourself mobile, because after that 35 age, man, it's you use it or you lose it. And so mobility is definitely important, but not something that some of these, there's these gurus say that you have to focus on 24/7. But as far as the joint health goes, there's definitely things you can do supplement wise, but I think people get carried away with that. It's just more so of cleaning up the diet, and I'm a big fan of making sure that you're eating from natural as you can from the earth. And like, some of the basics things can be very helpful, like curcumin, and some of those natural things like Boswellia complex can be very beneficial for joint health. But it's more so, I find, the healthier that the males eat, the better their body feels joint wise. And then that translates to a lot more things, because guess what? You lose 5 pounds of fat. You're carrying a lot less on your body to have to even work around.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, I mean, it's such a multifaceted thing. And so, like, let's kind of break those down even more. Like, I'm looking over here because I've got a red band that's hanging on my bookcase over here. So, like, one thing I do consistently throughout the day, a lot of times during my work blocks, I'll use the Pomodoro technique. So I'm working like hard for 25 minutes, complete focus, then I'll take a few minutes off. And so I'll grab it's a 1/8 inch powerlifting band. You can find them like Elite FTS. You can find them on Amazon. Band dislocations for shoulder mobility, like very small things like that, just to keep healthy. I've got this couch directly behind me. Same thing. I'll drop down. I'll do a couch stretch, loosen up my hip flexors. And it's not that you have to do a 20-minute routine, like an FMS routine when all the corrective stuff was so popular, probably when we were kind of going through college and getting certifications. But it's being able to keep that consistent movement. Another underrated thing, and like something we really focus on incorporating directly within our coaching, is getting small walks in throughout the day. And it's not that we're doing walks just to hit a step count or just to hit a certain calorie allotment. When we're sedentary throughout the day, like our blood is not moving. Our lymph is not moving through our body. We're getting stuck in these kyphotic positions. Yep. Muscles are shutting down and we get tighter. And so when we're actually forced to go on a walk, even if it's 5 minutes, like go on a 5-minute walk, if you control your own schedule, like every couple hours, 10-minute walk every couple hours, whatever it is, like you dynamically stabilize your hips and your spine with every step that you take. It opens up your hip flexors. It opens up your shoulders. It opens up your lungs, your diaphragm. Everything can move so much better. And it sounds like too simple to work, But little things like that can have a profound difference, not just on the way that your body feels, but
Yeah.
your energy levels and your performance throughout the day.
And you got to think of it too. Like you're also, when you walk towards something, naturally, science is telling you, your brain and neurologically, you're going towards something. You're hitting a goal. So walking towards something is always a beneficial thing. And actually, studies show that it boosts serotonin levels, which then everybody wants to be happier because when you sit in all, I mean, even myself, like when we're here, I mean, people think online coaches are these ripped people that just work out all day. No, man, we're behind the computers a lot. So it gets hard. And sometimes when you get up, it's like, oh, I mean, that wave hits you where you're just sitting all day, but that walk can do wonders, not only just for keeping yourself mobile and active, but I notice the days where I sit, like when we're on planes or traveling, my body hurts that next day, you know?
Yeah, no, definitely, definitely. It's amazing, how coaching has evolved in many ways. Of course, there's some great benefits for in-person coaching. Some things that you can do when you're working with somebody they're very technical that you can't necessarily cover online. The occupation when you're an online coach is surprisingly sedentary. Like as an example for me, I was up at 5 and worked for 90 minutes before my daughter got up, did dad stuff. Fortunately, I took the dog out for a walk after that. But that entire time, what was I doing? Sending voice notes, connecting with clients, going through some check-in messages, stuff like that. And then it was 8 until noon, straight through, right at my desk. Then it was a couple more meetings, short walk, and now we're right here. And so if we're looking at it, right, it's like, hey, it's been 8 hour day just about up to this point already. And I've spent 6.5 in front of a screen. We've got a couple hours to go, right? So we can empathize with what it's like to be stuck behind a computer and doing Zoom meetings for long periods of time as well. And it's just important to kind of find time to get those snacks and movements in throughout the day. Now, you mentioned nutrition. We can talk a little bit about the supplementation angle, but I think like one thing that's really important to understand, and I want you to dig into this a little bit more because I think this is more your zone of excellence than mine, is how inflammation is systemic. And so the way that certain foods impact our digestion and how that really impacts everything else in our body. Can you dig into that a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a, a great topic that I've learned firsthand, just being, a victim of it because of seeing what it's done to my gut. As, some of the people that you'll see in big, even bodybuilders over the years, you see those kind of big distended guts and people wonder how they so ripped. But the thing is that your body, it all starts in the gut. And actually your immune system is over 60% comprised of your gut. So if your gut's going to be compromised, your immune system's down. And if your immune system's down, it's going to then begin wreaking havoc along other areas, what we call your HPA axis, or, working through the entire parts of your body that are stemming from hormones to all the way to thyroid to all the way to working on sex hormones that are very important for your body's production of muscle growth or fat loss. And the gut's a big thing because when you are inflamed there, it's going to always take a route where I always tell clients, how many of you guys, and this is the biggest thing because they don't focus about the foods that they're eating, but I say, when was the last time that you had a stomach ache? And they would always say, okay, because they always remember. You always remember when you have a lot of stomach pain. And I always will say, how
Yeah.
did that make you feel that day? And they say, miserable. I didn't want to be around anybody. I didn't want to have my shirt off. I didn't want to work out. I was depressed. I was angry, moody, because you are miserable when you've got gut health. And Eric, I'll be blatantly honest with you. I allowed inflammation and stress to take over my body from owning that gym to points where I would come home and my gut would swell 11, 12 pounds in one day. And it was bad because I was implementing intermittent fasting on top of a high stress environment, on top of training like an animal. So I would then come home
Yeah.
and literally be like this for about 3 hours because of how bad my stomach was. And until I finally got a grip on exactly what was causing, because then what's the go-to? Because when you feel like your stomach is swollen and you just kept, let's move, let's walk, let's work out. So I thought that was the helpful thing, but it just kept making things worse. So it was a big wake-up call to say, look, it's sometimes going to be helpful to first calm the body down. And so when people think that, because we're like, oh, we are calm, but stress is not dependent on an exterior present. It's actually from what's inside of your body and how things can build up over time. And I call it like your toxic bucket, right? So we've got
Yeah.
a bucket that can get filled and come down. And so over the course of probably a year, say you've got some financial stress, that bucket comes up. Then you've got some relationship stress, the bucket comes up. Then you start working out, that bucket comes up. And then at some point, that bucket's going to overflow. And the problem with our country is that we never let that bucket drop. We're always hanging on the top. So that
Hmm.
slightest thing in life, whether it's maybe something that's not even that big of a deal, maybe you've got like a tax return that came back that wasn't what you thought, and you get mad. Well, that's going to tip over, and your
Been
body
there.
will. I mean, you ever know? Like, and I asked, how many times have you just one small thing that happens, and it's like, why does my body feel like this? And it's because they can't. And that's why some people, I tell you, you go on vacation and relax for a week, you come back and you're like, I didn't do anything, but I feel amazing. And I lost weight. Voila. So that's the beauty of stress, because when you can drop that down, that's going to see what your body will let go of then, with obviously the high stress environment, high cortisol. It comes with then high blood sugars. Your insulin can never get back into being where it needs to be, because you're always shuttling it high and it's never coming back down because your glucose is so high, because we're living off that. So there's always that connection. And I always will tell clients that it's not about your thyroid being off, because that can come up and down daily. It's about what you're doing to the stress that starts within the gut, because that's where it houses everything from your immune system to everything else. So that's why it's important to put exactly what you need to in that body down here first, and then everything else will start working along its path.
Yeah, I mean that's incredible, right? I mean, you talked about a few things in there that really stood out to me, and it's like one was like I was intermittent fasting, had the stress kind of going on with work, and then pushing high intensity workouts. And it's again, it's not that any one of these things is bad, right? Like there's nothing wrong with intermittent fasting in the right context. There's nothing wrong with pushing high intensity workouts in the right context. But the important thing is to have awareness over, kind of these different things and how big of stressors they can be when they're stacked on top of each other. Because a lot of times what happens, it's like you're okay until you're not, right? Like that's a lot of times how stress is. It's almost like, yeah, everything's fine, like until it's not. Then you're on a spiral of poor decisions, poor health, whatever it is. And that's what knocks a lot of people off actually with fat loss.
Yeah.
It's like they'll be doing very well, across the board, but then they have a ton of stress going on that they're not really addressing. And then all of a sudden it's like they have one bad meal and then the train is off the fucking tracks.
Yep.
It's, that 7 to 10 day bender, they gain a bunch of weight back. And if they're in a calorie deficit, they're more likely to gain it. And it just becomes an absolute cluster, right? Whereas you go on vacation, you take that stress way down, you might be eating a little bit worse than you typically would. You might be drinking more and you
Yeah.
can still lose weight because that stress response can have such a profound difference.
And
All right, so let's talk about some food, maybe not necessarily like foods, but even like food preparation. What are some things that we can do to improve maybe digestive quality in gut health? I mean, there's a lot of individual variability, but I think there are general practices that people can take from this.
Yeah, and that's a great thing that you bring up too, is because it's not just about the food you eat, it's about what you do to help make it digest well. And so a lot of times the simple, and this is probably the hardest, but yet the most common sense thing, is that when we're dads, right? So 9 times out of 10 when we're eating dinner, we're doing it standing up, because our kids are literally playing with their food on the floor. Or last night it was literally Brea's like literally getting fed by Ellie, and I'm sitting there. What's Brea have? Oh, she's just eating some chocolate. And I'm like, where did you even get chocolate? We don't have dinner for chocolate. So I'm like figuring out where she got chocolate from. So it's just like the chaos at dinner is tough. But what I always will tell guys is, like, either number one, I tend to think of a practice is have a shake while you're feeding your kids, to make sure that you don't feel like ravenous or going into the cupboard and getting their leftovers, and then find a time separately from them to eat where they're calm, or just make sure that that the digestion is crucial. So make time to actually chew your food and swallow it, because it's very important tactic that people miss. And even I did, until I actually started, like, you know what, I kind of do just get my food in and just shove it down. And it's very hard, because that body then has to digest larger pieces of food, which then can cause what acid reflux, digestive cramping, bloating, all these things that then are very hard to deal with within that next 2 to 3 hours. And the thing about your stomach is it has to produce acid. So the second that food goes in, it needs to start getting a lot of acid out to produce and digest it. And if it's not getting enough, so then we're starting to put people on you got people on Tums that come in to me and like, oh, I do a box of Tums a week. I'm like, whoa, like what's going on
Let's
here?
nix that right now. It's not going to help you.
So yeah, so things like betaine, can be very helpful, and so we can do some things that help produce more stomach acid. But at the end of the day, it's all comes down to hydration levels, slowing down, thinking about your food before you're having to shove it in, and the general practices that can be very helpful for digestion, for especially for parents. It's just those simple practices, and that's just where it really comes down to the matter of even choosing the right foods that are be good for digestion is important too, because that's another great thing that I do get people that I'm sure you do too, where they get carried away with that. Oh, well, I'm in that vegetable. I got to get all this fiber in. And so
Yeah.
excessive fiber can also cause a lot of problems, whether it is good for your body or not, but you got to be careful with how much you do.
So many great knowledge tidbits in there. Like just the simple fact of slowing down is so crucial. I was just reading Adam Bornstein's book, "You Can't Mess This Up," and like that was one thing that they're talking about specifically in there, where it's like even just taking a longer duration to eat dramatically reduces actually how many calories people consume because they're so much more intentional about the process.
Yeah.
In addition, it takes time for the digestive enzymes to really start kicking in. I mean, we have amylase directly, inside of our mouth. It kind of kickstarts carbohydrate digestion right away. But like by and large, it takes a little bit for your body to kind of get in this position where we can go through and break down food and do it really consistently. Furthermore, it can take 20 minutes for hunger signals to go from your brain to the mechanical receptors directly in your stomach and then shoot back up to your brain. So if you're stressed out and you gorge on 5 pieces of pizza in 17 minutes, like, yeah, it's gonna hit you,
Yeah.
right? And I think that's a huge thing.
I never even knew about the water intake, which is something that a lot of people kind of don't realize too, but it's definitely they've done studies on this that actually you're going to be better off to have your meal and then wait 20 30 minutes till you start drinking, because if you start having your water or your drink while you're eating, it can disrupt the digestive process of the food. And I then started implementing that process where I'll eat and then I'll go for, like, I sometimes will just move, play with my kids, go for a walk after and come back, and then I'll start drinking. And it has such a better digestive process and how your body feels afterward too from that.
Yeah, that's actually something that I noticed as well. Like this happened probably 6 months ago, and I'm like, something just set off my digestion, like bloating, indigestion, just felt like dog shit, for lack of a better term, right?
Yeah.
And I was like reflecting back, I'm like, what was going on? I'm like, oh, I forgot what I was eating, but I drank like 3 or 4 like giant glasses of water while I was eating. It took like a little time of like self-reflection, and frankly it took a couple weeks to almost get everything dialed back in after that, right? And
Yeah.
so that was like a time period of high stress. Again, I wasn't hydrating consistently throughout the day. All of a sudden, like I was parched, and it was just like I needed all the water, all of everything, all at one point, and the body's going to fight back and things like that.
Yeah.
What type of an impact do you feel that eating like at consistent times has in terms of overall digestive health?
Your body is definitely is a machine. It's known to know exactly what it wants when it wants it. And it's crazy because I'm sure you always get these clients, the same ones where, oh, I'm not a breakfast eater, and I'm like, okay, well, eat breakfast for 2 weeks and then come back to me. And they do, and like, dude, now I can't miss breakfast. What the heck did you do to me? Well, welcome to repetition and your body's ability to want to be resilient at what you do to it. So it's kind of like the whole practice of carbs. People come to me like, I haven't eaten carbs in forever. I'm like, okay, well, eat carbs. So do it. You
Yeah.
can't like act like you're going to be practicing as a goalie, but you're a striker and never get back there and be a goalie. So if you want to start getting good at eating carbs, you got to start eating them. And so then you can optimize when you eat them, which can be helpful. But ultimately, it's very funny how you say that, because it's just one of those things where the timing of when you do eat, your body will adjust to it. But whether you're a snacker or whether you're a one or two meal a day person, the total calories throughout that day is what's most important. But again, when it comes to individualism, it's how that person is going to best be suited. And that's where a little bit of flexibility comes. And that's where I always will say the best piece of advice I got from one of my functional medicine coaches was, every diet works until it doesn't. So because there is that point where it's going to stop, and it's just the matter of then knowing how to be flexible within the diet, so how to practice this, and then once your body can be healthy enough, then you can implement throughout the week, whether you do a little bit of fasting, then you have a little bit of carbs, like then maybe you do a day of keto, or hey, days that I'm presenting, or days like I'm sure that you're doing big exact things, or you have to be really on it mentally. Fasting can be beneficial because not eating can help stimulate cortisol response, which can help actually give the brain more suspicion processing of being able to think more clearly. So I tend to be a little bit better when I'm fasted, when I'm thinking. So it's all about finding that happy medium. But when everybody says like, you got to eat this way, I'm like, why? There's always that fine line of figuring out what works for you. But at the end of the day, it's how that lifestyle comes into play for that certain body, because what works for Susie isn't going to work for Dan.
Yeah, no, I love that overall approach, right? And like, I had a couple new client consults today, and I was, talking to them about diet strategy. And whereas you see a lot of people in the fitness industry will cherry pick and be like, I'm a keto coach, I'm an intermittent fasting coach, whatever. And I like to take a different approach. I like to always say, like, you know what, like I view myself as a mechanic. I've got all these different tools that I can use. And depending on the car in front of me, what the problem is, like we're going to apply different tools at different times. And the
Yeah.
beautiful thing is, like with that approach, that's what ultimately develops that flexibility,
Yeah.
right? Like if I'm traveling, yeah, like maybe I will use something like intermittent fasting because one, I like to be very dialed in and focused because I work like crazy on an airplane. And then I'm more likely to probably, go out to dinner, maybe have a couple of drinks, have kind of like backloaded calories that day. And it allows me to stay within the guidelines of what I need on those particular days. Conversely, if I've got a really hard training block and I'm at home, I'm probably going to have 4 meals throughout the day that are pretty evenly spaced because it's going to help me manage stress, have consistent energy, have consistent kind of like cravings and digestive health throughout. And it's about being able to have these tools and build that diverse approach to really go from there. We kind of kicked this portion off talking about like inflammation and stress. And those things play a huge role in terms of how your joints are going to feel with your training. Right. And so like let's pivot over to the training side a little bit more. So like what are some good training practices that you would emphasize? And then let's go into something specific you and I have talked about before. It's like knee health. Anyone who's put in maybe a lot of miles running or played competitive sports can probably relate to like, hey, knee pain is no fun. And it can really make lower body training, which is 65% of what your training probably should be if we're just looking at a mass continuum compared to the rest of the body, a lot less effective. So like, let's talk about some best practices there.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great topic, because it's one of those things where it's hard for people to stay motivated when they're injured. And that's the biggest thing that will probably, and what you'll probably see with your clients too, is that when someone gets aches, pains, or injuries, that's their first cue to, I can't do this. And that's where being resilient and working on the mindset of things about being hard. And that's what I've had to do, because I've had 7 knee surgeries, and my knees have been through the ringer with the accident and everything I've been through. So it's one of those things where I had to learn what to do to work around that. And so that's what you kind of use as an approach and a tool to teach your clients is, look, there's always a way. It's just you got to be one to figure it out, or be able to be able to execute it. Because as far as knee health goes, there's always going to be things that can help get it stronger. And so the things that you got to focus on primarily with knee health is going to be, let's work on the glutes, let's work on the hips, let's work on the hamstrings, let's work even on the tibial tendons in your calves, because all these things are supporting structures to help with flexion and extension of the knee. And oftentimes when people focus on, I've got knee pain, they just avoid everything. So how many times you get, my knee hurts, so I'm not going to do anything today, so I take the day off. Well, you'd be better off doing some glute bridges and doing some band walks and just doing some great things that are going to help promote the health and strength of the area supporting the cast of that knee. So, like the VMO is a big thing, a big topic, that teardrop muscle in the front of the quad. Well, how many times you see people going into TKEs or doing things that are going to be targeting that directly, but they say that their knees hurt. Well, a lot of times, if you just get that muscle stronger, or if you, in retrospect, even work on the tibial tendons that are supporting the calf, your knee is going to start feeling a lot better. And that's going to be a big, big thing, because it's those tendons around the knee that will then support that kind of injury that's going to be kind of housed in there, whether you're dealing with an ACL or PCL, or sometimes now you got a lot of people with meniscus tears, and the arthritis can develop. But as that develops, because even like I've actually been told from the surgeon up at your knee is probably that of an age of a 90-year-old guy. And I'm like, okay, well, structurally, how does it look? He's like, it's good because you're strong everywhere else. So that's the thing, that I don't feel that pain as a 90-year-old person because I'm supporting it in other areas. And so it's kind of like that. You pick up somebody and carry them on your back. Well, great, you're supporting them, right? So when you can support their injured person or the injured part of your body with that supporting cast, it starts to really take a lot of that pain off. And I think the simple things are just that: it's hammering the posterior chain for your knees and working on kind of target and directly hitting those things that are right around that area.
Yeah, I found the same thing. Bias things a little bit more towards the posterior chain. So if we're looking at a ratio, maybe I'm going like 60-40 kind of hip hinge type movements versus a squat movement. When I'm doing a squat movement, in some cases, like I'll do mobility work where I'm allowing more knee flexion and getting deeper and really working through those ranges of motions. But when I'm going to be loading heavier for like strength, power, and performance, it's going to be more glute focused. So my stance will be a little bit wider. My toes will be externally rotated just a little bit because, again, that's going to pull in the muscles that can also help support the knee and still provide the training effect that we're looking for. Especially, as a guy, I'm 35, I want to stay strongly and explosive, but I also don't want to feel like shit when I drop down to pick up my daughter.
Yeah,
So it's kind of like finding those balances and what you can do. Now, do you recommend like a lot of unilateral work just to kind of activate like stabilizers? And if so, like what things do you focus on? What do you stay away from?
yeah, absolutely. That's another good question. So the big thing for, especially for what I find for tendon tissue resiliency, is going to be isometrics, single leg work. Like I know one of my favorites are going to be Bulgarian isometrics. So you can't really beat anything more than an exercise like that. And then the cool thing about it is that you can always, sometimes I'm even using it, if you're injured to a point where I even have clients that really can't even do a body weight Bulgarian split squat. So you get some PVC pipes and you just can hold them there for assistance. And you can bias whether you want to really target the glutes or the quads by just your torso position.
Talk about a few specifics on what that is for the listeners.
Yeah, so like if you want to do a Bulgarian and target more of the glute focus, all you got to do is tip that torso down a little bit more and have a little bit more of a wider stance, and and you can always then just bring that front foot out a little bit further and then hold that isometric, and just doing that for a 30-second hold and then using those rods and then hitting a couple reps after that. That pre-fatigue isometric is going to work wonders to then bring blood flow into that area that's injured, and then when you start working the muscle after that within those few repetitions, you're going to now provide a lot of what we call that concentric tension that's going to bring that muscle fiber back into eccentric and concentric loading. That's not so much of a, like you said, you don't load heavy on those injured areas. That's giving it just enough to help with that tissue regeneration. So the Bulgarian's a great one. The Spanish squat with, I use the NT loops where I put them behind my legs and I'm doing isometrics or slow holds, so that, like the longer rep holds for those. And anything that I'm doing as far as like the TKE style, or even like, I even with your programming that you had for me, the glute ham raises where you're going to go into the hold, the isometrics, those are great as well. I think people in general, they really underestimate the importance of isometrics and single leg work because they're so focused on the deadlift, the squat, making sure they're hitting
Yeah.
two legs with everything. I want to get heavy and strong. I want to be lean. But you miss those simple things like just being able to, I mean, how many times are you people holding on to rails when they're going up the stairs in their own houses, but yet they don't want to even do a step up or work on like maybe a lateral step up or a lateral lunge. Like these things are always missed, but lateral lunges they suck and they're hard, but working to get good at them can help prevent your body from being a lot more of a terminal disaster once you hit that 40 age range where you're trying to chase after your kid and your Achilles goes or your knee blows up. So
Yeah, so you got to be able to train the positions and the angles and the movement patterns that you're going to go through in everyday life. Now, it doesn't mean you have to, hook up a cable attachment and start swinging it like a golf club. We're not talking about that. But like, yeah, like, are you going to be doing things laterally? Are you going to be playing a pickup game of basketball? Like, cool. Maybe a lateral lunge is going to be something to incorporate because it's going to activate a lot of those neural pathways. It's going to activate those muscle fibers. You mentioned quite a bit about isometrics. And so, for those listening, like an isometric can be as simple as like doing a push-up, lowering yourself to where you're hovering above the ground and then just holding that position. It's an incredible way to actually activate dormant muscle fibers. And so if you think about it this way, if we have, if we can activate every muscle fiber, that's 100%. A lot of people might be walking around, say, activating, just as a ballpark, 55, 60% of the muscle fibers during a muscular contraction that they could due to a number of different issues. But by doing certain exercises, and we could talk about even like jumps and throws from an athletic perspective, can help fire up more muscle fibers. We can talk about isometrics, like a Bulgarian isometric, bottom of a squat in isometric, the push-up example that I gave, and just holding those positions early on in a workout or even as a preset fatiguer, it's going to allow you to actually recruit more muscle fibers. And so when we can recruit more muscle fibers, say you go from doing 50, 60, 65% of muscle fibers to say 85,
Yep.
What's going to have a bigger training effect?
Exactly.
Is it going to have a bigger training effect when we turn the lights on, we're recruiting more? Hell
Yep.
yeah, because if we can train more of those muscle fibers and fatigue them, that's a bigger training response.
Yeah.
And so I think people look at some of these things that are like corrective and like an isometric, and it's not as sexy as a deadlift, but like you want to be able to deadlift more and do it pain-free, getting strong as shit on this stuff, like that'll do it.
Even that, or I even tell people to think of it as the mobility aspects of it too. Like, okay, you can get on a leg press and put 6 plates on the side, but can you get into a low squat and hold that? And what are you doing? You're not activating all the muscle fibers if you can't literally get into a low squat and hold that. So that's why I feel like it's important. A big missed thing that a lot of people do in their program is they don't learn to be mobile first, so that way their body can take load later. and in the positions that they need, so they get the most benefit of the exercise.
Yeah, that's the big thing, and speaking of mobility, I mean, let's dig into this just a little bit. But I think there's a lot of misnomers where people look at, hey, I want to become more flexible, more mobile. I should stretch more. Well, stretching does have its benefits, but like, what is the benefit of what can we do in the gym with weight training to improve that mobility and that stability to prevent injuries?
Yeah, that's another good one. I mean, honestly, the big thing that I tell people is picking the right, and I'm a huge fan of like, yes, static stretching has its time and place, but I'm not a fan of doing it while you're training. I'm a fan of doing those things like maybe you're doing pigeon stretch holds or like, like you said, the couch stretches, doing those throughout your day, but incorporating things within the gym are going to be very helpful that you can do in an active, dynamic way. Maybe it's more so like I've got, like, for example, I've got a set of rings in my gym and I just take those rings and I'm working myself through all ranges of motion with my shoulders through dislocates, and then I'm working my body into a little bit more lateral positions, and I'm doing that throughout my warm-up or if in between sets, because even recent research has shown that even working in between sets after you're focusing on a muscle group and then going into work that in more of an active, isolated way can help drive neurologically more blood flow to that area and have more focal point on that area for muscle growth. So, the whole theory is, like you said, go do a set on the bench. I mean, I used to see people do it in the gym where you do a set on the bench press and then you see them doing the wall stretches on the pecs. Well, there is some theory to that, working in that manner. Now, I wouldn't just do a direct stretch, but working the body throughout those ranges of motion throughout the gym. I mean, and honestly, half the time my mobility is literally cleaning up or taking care of my kids during my set. So that can have a little bit of some motion and active isolated work there too.
No doubt, man. Dropping down into a squat and doing all that fun stuff. You just reminded me, man. Like, I just threw up a video on social media earlier today as of filming this. And I was in the gym. I think I was doing RDL with like 385. I was going pretty heavy. And my daughter looks at me. She's like, "Daddy, do you need help?" And I'm like, "No." And I'm like 4 reps and in comes flying like this pink fuzzy ball that she has, and she just like launched it from across the garage. And like, of course, like I'm trying to keep my spine tight and trying to keep my air in. I just bust out laughing, man. Kids are the best. Kids are the best.
It is funny. It's they always come into it the time where, "Daddy, are you okay?" And I'm like, "Buddy, this is a heavy lift right now." They come in that mid lift too.
Exactly. Like, hey, I'm not trying to be scary here. I'm not trying to be loud, but there might be some noises coming from Dad. I don't know. There might be some noises.
It's that 1% tough, the 99% teddy bear on the outside, right?
That's exactly it. It's being able to go back and forth when you need to between those. So, Mike, this has been an absolutely fantastic discussion. I really appreciate your insight, particularly around digestive health, around immune health, around stress relief, because those are such underrated components that most people don't really think about. Most people just think about the training, the nutrition, maybe a little bit about sleep now since Matthew Walker's book came out a few years ago. But really beyond that, it's these other areas that really make all of it stick, make all of it really work together. So where can we learn more from you? Where can we find out more about what you do?
Yeah, and like I always tell people, I always say, like, to be healthy on the outside, and because everybody's driving out that image, right? You want to look good, you want to be able to rock the beach and have the body. You can't have that if you're not healthy on the inside. And I was a victim of it. And that's why it makes me such a good coach at what I do, because the people that I see kind of come to me with that. They want to look good, but they're struggling in the inside. And that's just what needs to be repaired first. And so when you can do that, your body's going to change in ways you never thought possible. So my Instagram was hacked. So I had to start a brand new page, so please just follow me on my new page if you haven't, but it's just Mike J over there. And as far as where else you can find me, I mean, I've got most of my followers are on Facebook, and I'm starting to get my YouTube channel back up. But outside of that, I have a website, and I am also, like you, I'm in a lot of the local, a lot of the national magazines, but I have a news segment too that you guys can check me out on ABC News. So I try to do as much as like you do, man. So we're always trying to put out knowledge and education for people, and it's because we're passionate about what we do.
Yeah, man. And fitness is a force multiplier. It sounds a little bit corny, but like when you get your health and fitness dialed in, it is the foundation. It is the bedrock for everything else. Thank you so much, Mike. Appreciate you coming on. Make sure you go and follow him. Check out his new segment on ABC. Give him a follow over on IG. And if you have any questions, hey, slide up into his DMs, fire away. He's always willing to help.
Thanks so much, man, for having me on.
Hey, it's Eric here again. Now, there are 3 ways that I can help you look great naked. Number 1, if you want to grab a free copy of the Look Great Naked protocol to help you lose body fat without counting calories, then go to bachperformance.com/free training. Number 2, if you're a busy guy looking to build muscle, then I recommend checking out our Minimalist Muscle Blitz, which has helped over 1,000 men build muscle without living in the gym. just go to minimalistmuscleblitz.com. The link will also be available in the show notes. Or number 3 and last, if you want to work with me directly and get the best results possible, apply at bachperformance.com/coaching to look great naked without living in the gym. Until next time, my friend,